Going off track is.
Going off track is taking a chance on yourself.
Following your pulse of curiosity.
It's making your own decisions.
The most wonderful adventure.
Hey friends, welcome back to Right Off Track. I'm your host, Anya Smith, and today we have an extraordinary guest who embodies the essence of transformation and the power of following your passion. Meet Klaus Wiemer, PhD, a man who went from cattle ranches in northern Mexico to revolutionizing the field of fertility and embryology. Klaus is here to share his incredible journey that proves it's not about where you start, but where you finish that counts. He's a living testament to the idea that when you invest in yourself and seize opportunities, you can change the course of your life. Raised on a cattle ranch, Klaus found his calling in embryology and went on to earn his master's at New Mexico State University and a PhD at Louisiana State University. Just when he thought he'd spend his life in the animal industry, a single phone call from a renowned scientist shifted his entire trajectory. Fast forward to 1988, and he's winning the grand prize from the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. Klaus has since published 80 peer-reviewed articles, co-founded fertility centers, and now consults the IVF centers globally. He's also the corporate lab director for Global Premier Fertility and recently took on the role of head of clinical affairs Americas for Fertility, an AI company based in Israel. Klaus is here to remind us, if you don't invest in yourself, who will? So grab your favorite beverage, sit down, and let's dive into this awe-inspiring conversation. Trust us, you don't want to miss this. Thank you for joining us, Klaus. So excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to get to do this and share my story.
I'm honored. And just to share a little bit more context about how we met. So honestly, you know my husband, Adam. You guys work out together.
Yep.
In Kirkland, Washington. But right now you're in Argentina, right?
Yeah, I'm in Buenos Aires, exactly.
And what are you doing there, if you don't mind sharing it for our audience?
Well, no problem. I'm on a scientific advisory board for a really large IVF clinic here that's celebrating its 40th anniversary this week. So we're here giving lectures, going over all our scientific experiments and studies that we're doing, and also going to have a good time, a great excuse to have some Argentinian wines and some great steaks. So who would turn that down?
It does that. I would not. Next time you have an extra plane ticket, I'll come with you. But in the meanwhile, you said 40 years of the center, which is so much has happened in this time. And I'm curious with your own journey, winding back. Again, we talked about a little bit about your background, but can you tell us in your own words, like, how did this whole fascinating journey start to where now you're a global expert, but where did it begin?
Well, I almost feel like I was born to do this because reproductive and fertility in animals in most farms is a really big thing. Farmers are highly educated. Most of them are scientists, understand how important reproductive efficiency is. So a lot of the things that we do today in treating human infertility was actually based in the veterinary aspect. So growing up on our ranch, we did fertility assessment in our animals and things like that. So I was always aware of that. And then, when you were watching a sperm cell swim across a microscope, you're like, wow, look at this thing, man. It has all the information to make a baby. And, it was just pretty wild to see all that. And so I was just fascinated by that whole aspect.
I think you mentioned to me earlier, I could be wrong, that it was your grandparents' farm that you were working on or growing up on?
My grandfather had a large cattle ranch in northern Mexico in the state of Chihuahua, which is, between Sonora and the state of Chihuahua. It was up in the Sierra Madres. It was a really large cattle ranch. We had over 2,000 head of cattle, and we also raised horses as well.
Got it. So what was it like? So you're growing up there, you have this initial interest. What do you see yourself doing when, like, going from the ranch and then going to school?
Well, I mean, obviously people like myself, we're going to, either become veterinarians or work in some area like that. That's kind of the deal that we all take. So I was an animal science major at a small college in East Texas called Stephen F. Austin, Go Lumberjacks. I was an animal science major and I thought I was going to be pre-vet, but then I volunteered at a vet clinic. I was like, oh man, I just can't deal with all these sick animals. This is
Oh,
just too much for me. So I was a kind of a lost soul. And then I applied to graduate school at New Mexico State because I was like, well, I know I love science. I know I love the reproductive aspects, but I don't know what I want to do yet. So when I got to New Mexico State, I was working on my master's degree. I was working more in male infertility. I was looking at the effects of certain diseases in populations of sheep in New Mexico. And we took a field trip up to this dairy in New Mexico called Price's Dairies. And at the time, they were one of the leading edge private industries in terms of assisted reproduction, really pushing technology. So my friend who happened to work there had a dish out with all these embryos, and I looked into the dish and I went, wow, holy smokes, this is it. This is my calling. It was like as if I made a connection with these embryos. It was like, beam me up, Scotty. I want to be part of your world. And just that was it. So then at that point in time, I'm like, this is perfect. I'm going to work on a cattle ranch. I'm going to do this and that and the other. So I was working at this dairy. I applied to LSU. The professor flew out from LSU to visit where we were. He was super impressed with everything, and which was good because I was a guy who took the graduate record exam, like 6 and 7 and 8 times in order to get the minimum score. Whereas some of my colleagues in grad school worked in a gas station all night. The next morning, they went and took a test and made really high marks.
wow.
And I was at the bottom of the food chain. But luckily, we had a professor who says, I don't really believe in these standardized tests. You're like a Marine. You're first in and last out. He goes, that's what I need. That's what the world is all about. So I was attracted to somebody like that because he would see you more as a whole.
If I can add to that, from my experience, again, this whole journey has started pretty recently, the whole entrepreneur side of things. And getting into it, I didn't have this community that necessarily inspired me, and no longer did I have a job to look at for that support. But at the same time, I found that we have the gift of online communities and resources like LinkedIn or other channels where you can go and start finding people again who are doing something that inspires you or that you want to learn from. So to anybody listening, also, if you're looking for that inspiration, don't have it immediately visible to you in your environment, there are the resources like LinkedIn communities, groups that are focused on certain subjects and expertise areas where I truly believe, even if you don't feel confident right now with something, you can be curious and humble and ask for help and just to learn from others and build that confidence that way. So you don't have to me, sometimes it seem intimidating. Like, just show up confident. But what if you don't? Maybe it's again starting with that perspective of I'm going to be curious, I'm going to learn, I'm going to try to connect and not be phased if somebody says no, to your point, but I'm going to keep at it. And that's how my confidence is going to form. Not that I know everything right now, but I'm confident I can learn.
Yeah, very well said. I couldn't have said it any better. The thing too is that I have many times failed,
Mm,
at certain things, but I never took it personal because I
mm,
knew before I failed that I was trying as hard as I could.
mm,
So I would try to find the positive on that. And it wasn't until I could step outside of myself and look at the problem that you really can start to learn. So again,
mm,
it's very and where I'm going with this is that if you're still developing the mindset, it's very easy to have somebody turn you down and this turns into a pity party, and that
mm,
becomes self-consuming. And pity parties, they're really not fun, they're not sexy, there's nothing cool about pity parties. It's an N of
yeah.
one because nobody else cares. And that's the thing. You've got to be able to break that and go, well, it's kind of like dating. I must have,
Mm,
before my wife married me, I must have tried to meet as many people as I possibly could just because, and I thought I had a big L on my forehead, but again, you
mm,
just keep going and you just keep going and you try, and then you will meet people. If you work
mm,
in academics, for example, using Google Scholar, looking
yeah.
up some of the authors that you really like a lot, reaching out to them. They
Yeah.
love mentorship. if you're an engineer and work in the engineering or those kind of areas, again, a lot of these people have published in the field.
Yeah.
You can use Google Scholar to look them up. You can look up through LinkedIn a lot of these people that you admire. And then really, I would start though within your own organization.
Right.
And if there aren't people in your organization that share your vision, then maybe it's time to look for another job. Don't stay in something just because it's comfortable. You need to always be pushing yourself, and you need to be living in a somewhat uncomfortable state in your life, or else you'll start to settle for mediocrity, and you'll just start to settle for, oh well, that's good enough. And that's like cancer. Don't let that become part of your mantra.
Yeah. And that's powerful. So you mentioned not getting stagnant, keep growing. So I'm curious, what about in this new field? So now here you are, you're now working on human IVF, but so much is just developing that space. How do you stay motivated, inspired to keep pushing yourself for innovation while it's a completely brand new field? So really, like, you're pushing yourself towards your own standards, right? There's not a lot of other things that maybe are pushing you because it's so new.
That's a great question because really all areas of technology are right on that very edge. We're constantly pushing ourselves because we just have so much more tools around us, whether it's large data, AI, or now we've just collected a lot of data. But so that comes from within. And again, why did you become an embryologist, or why did you become a structural engineer, or why did you do this? And that should be what's driving you forward. And 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 I think it's important to reinvent yourself as you process. So I don't know what version I'm on right now, but I'm nowhere near cowboy 1.0 back in 1970 whatever. I'm not that guy anymore. I'm now Klaus version probably 25.0. But
Love it.
again, if you're not rediscovering yourself, then you're going to get old. And let me tell you, getting old is not for the weak. You got to prepare yourself mentally. You don't want to be that old person that's sitting on the park bench with the pigeons on your shoulder.
Yeah.
You want to be the old person doing yoga at the park that's bringing everybody in to do yoga with you. That's who you want to be.
Yeah. And could you share with us maybe some points of reinvention that you went through along your journey? Obviously, you've owned a business, you started your business, you owned a business, you transitioned. What were some of the major learnings from that?
Um, the reason why I always try to transition to something else is because I started to get uncomfortable and bored. And for me, bored is a really bad thing. And I think bored is bad for a lot of us. We tend to become self-destructive from the process of we don't grow. We start just thinking inwardly. So for me, in my field, because we're blessed with lots of new challenges, what I would constantly do was when I felt like my clinic was doing as best as it could, I would start to develop new technologies, come up with new ideas of doing things such that I would always bring in new technology into the laboratory. We're constantly pushing it. So I would collaborate with other researchers, work with people like that. So again, if you work in another field, but you're super interested in, say, the effects of so and so on, stability of a bridge, because you're an engineer. Well, that may not be necessarily your job, but start learning about it. Reach out to the people that are really into all of that stuff so that you make those connections. And what it does is it creates a pathway for you to start to grow and to learn. And then the other thing is too, with things like Google Scholar and stuff like that are around today, you can really self-teach in manners that really weren't around when I was, starting my career.
Right. And Google Scholar, for anybody that doesn't know, it's a database, let's say, of all the publications that are published in major journals. And you can search by like a topic. You can see how many publications they've published, how many citations they have. So you can educate yourself on so many topics and find like global innovators, PhDs, doctors, people who publish and people who are cited in that space. So just for reference there. And we haven't touched on IVF as much, but I want to hear about this passion. What are maybe some latest and greatest innovation ideas, topics that are happening in that space, or anything you're excited to share with anybody who maybe is familiar or maybe less familiar with that space?
Well, when I got into human IVF, it was like super cowboy from the standpoint of we were almost figuring it out as we were going along
Right.
because, all of a sudden we had a pregnancy and a delivery in 1978. It'd taken years to get to that. It'd taken from
Yeah.
1965, 68, it took almost 15 years to have the first pregnancy.
Wow.
But now all of a sudden things started to change, and now all of a sudden we have something we can offer to patients that have never been able to offer before. So what happened was, as I watched IVF go from a surgical procedure where the embryos were transferred back to the patient after just 2 days to
Wow.
now the procedures are done in an office setting with just a little bit of versat. It's done non-surgically, the egg retrievals are, and now we grow embryos for 7 days because we've developed, and then we've also developed ways to directly inject the sperm into eggs because 50% of our patients are males. I mean, we forget that having a baby is a team sport, and society tends to put more of the pressure, on the female, on our female partners. But today, infertility issues account, men account for 50% of it, because for a variety of reasons. But so I think it's along like that you just see so much technology that's driving it. In my field too, because we don't have any federal funding, that we don't have to go there, but there is no federal funding in the United States for human embryo research. Um, and as a result of that, a lot of the technology and innovations are driven by private enterprise. And private enterprise tends to push along much faster than, say, the National Institute of Health or Center for Disease Control if they were, say, funding stuff. So it's kind of a mixed blessing because the innovations that we've made in the United States and really all over the world, a lot of it has been driven because there's really no support. It's done internally.
Wow, it's interesting. And I'll share with the audience one thing that Adam, my husband, asked you is around like gender. If you don't mind me reaching the subject, we have our family has 3 boys, and so we honestly thinking maybe if we, for some insane reason, decided to have another one, it would be amazing if we could have a girl. Right. And that's honestly like, and I understand people have more issues around that. Right. But to be honest, if we were to try to have another child, it would be through IVF probably to see if we could have a girl. And I know that for some people that could be a moral issue. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts around the moral aspect of using IVF? Anything you want to share around that?
Yeah, so I believe in this, and this is a little bit controversial, but I believe in the following. I am not very religious, but I do believe in a greater entity or being or something, and I feel like all the learnings that we have are here to help our fellow man. And so I personally, as long as it's ethically studied and we review it from all different perspectives, from clergy, legal, we bring all the top brains together. I'm a big believer in bringing technology in to help people have children. So I'm a big believer in using IVF, whether it's for gender, to determine that you have the right gender. Why not? If you can, why not? Why would you have 6 kids in order to have a little boy or a little girl when you could very easily use science to help you? I mean, we use science all the time to help us.
Right.
Why do we put these taboos on anything having to relate to fertility or birth? We don't have those taboos on anything else. I mean, if your knee goes bad, you just get an artificial knee, right? But some people will say, but the argument is, I've heard people say, well, if God wanted you to have a child, you would not have this infertility treatment issue. And I would say, well, if God wanted you to walk after 50, he wouldn't have invented artificial knees. So, what it's kind of hard, so I'm a big believer in using technology as long as it's very well studied. Like all the studies that we do there, they go through tons of internal review boards and things like that. So I'm a believer in using technology in any way that you can, whether it's to cure diseases, whether it's to stop disease transmission in families, or something as simple as identifying gender, because you're also going to study all the other chromosomes
Yeah.
and reduce your likelihood of having a miscarriage and things
Yeah.
like that. So there's a lot of benefits that come from this.
Absolutely. I think it's good to be open-minded about the possibilities and think about things more broadly than just one perspective, right? Understand the risk and people's sides of the argument, but also make the right decision for you, right? Like not let it be a
And put
decision
yourself
that
in
just,
others.
yeah,
Put yourself in other people's spaces. So, for example, in certain cultures, genders are very important,
yeah,
and we see this happening, and people are saying, well, that shouldn't be important anymore. And we're like, you tell that family that this has been a tradition of theirs for 400 years, and you're going to tell them now we're going to stop this tradition?
yeah,
Who am I to do that? But if I can help you with technology, say, complete your family because it's important to have that. That's an important part of your society. I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to help the best I can.
yeah. And I can imagine that obviously it's not an easy process at all. Like anybody who has even heard about IVF, it's a emotionally, physically taxing process for parents, for moms, everybody involved. So it's not a lighthearted decision to say the least. And for me as a family, like our family, it would be a decision if we did decide to go that path, like just sharing my personal side. It's like we would either use IVF and have a girl, or we don't have another child. So it could be just an aspect, like, is there an opportunity to enrich the world with another human being, or maybe not, right? So again, that's my
Right.
personal thing. I'm okay and respect other people's opinions on it, but I appreciate your sharing your perspective on that too. And touching on sensitive subjects, we also talked about or mentioned that you're working with fertility. Can you mention a little bit more about what is happening with the space of AI and your views again on maybe controversial sides of that?
Well, I'm really very blessed to start working with a company called Fertility. They're based out of Tel Aviv. And I think for me, it's the perfect way to put the sprinkles on my professional cupcake. And and the reason why I say that is because my whole career I've studied how embryos develop and what's the impact of how an embryo develops on its possibility of either being genetically normal or making a baby. And so, I did a lot of predictive algorithms and a lot of database crunching, during my professional career. But then when I saw how artificial intelligence could lend itself very well for that. And so for the audience, just so they understand, in IVF, we look at embryos all the time because we want to see how they grow from a one cell all the way up to about 250, 300 cells.
Mhm.
And we think that how they go from one cell to, multi hundreds of cells, it makes a difference, that the history makes a difference. And we used to take the embryos out of the incubators to look at them. And that's not so good because that'd be like taking the embryos out of the uterus to look at them. Well, they don't like that. So,
Mm.
what's happened now with AI and new equipment is we've got microscopes with cameras in them that
Wow.
actually measure the development of the embryo during its entire time that it's in the incubator. And so for me, that was like, okay, that's going to be the beginning of the next revolution in IVF. And that
Mhm.
is that we're going to collect all this data and then we're going to know, did this embryo make a baby? Exactly what happened. So for the listeners, if you have a lot of data and you have outcomes, then you can apply mathematics and algorithms to that to go, okay, if an embryo does a certain thing, is it more likely to make a baby? It's just like
Right.
if a person that's running runs a certain way, are they more likely to finish a marathon or not? So again,
Yeah.
by using algorithms and stuff like that. So what Fertility has done is they've just developed this amazing platform that allows